I don't remember my name anymore.
I've been down here too long.
This basement, damp, cold, and full of echoes, is all I've known for decades.
I remember pain. I remember chains. I remember the thudding silence after my last scream. They say souls tethered by violence never rest. Maybe that's true. I didn't pass on. I stayed. I became part of the dark, the mildew-soaked walls, the rattling pipes that moan even when no wind blows. I am the breath behind the necks of those who descend the stairs.
They call me the man in the basement.
But I wasn't always a man. I was a boy once. Innocent.
Afraid.
Dragged here by someone who wore the skin of kindness but moved with cruelty in his bones.
I don't remember his face.
Only the smell, and the way the floorboards creaked when he came for me. I died in this basement, alone, unheard, and when I awoke as something else, I waited. At first, I screamed in silence, tried to claw my way out of the concrete, but the living couldn't hear me, couldn't see me, so I lingered, until the house changed hands.
Until new footsteps echoed overhead. The first family heard me. At night, the father would storm down, convinced someone was whispering his name.
But it wasn't a whisper, it was a plea. Help me.
He couldn't understand.
He painted crosses on the wall, called a priest. The priest chanted and sprinkled water, and for a moment, I felt something left. Hope.
But then they left.
And I remained. The house never stays empty for long. It wants people. Needs them. Like I once did. Then came the boy Eli. He was small, maybe 6.
Curious.
Too curious.
He found the old hatch door in the floor of the pantry, pried it open despite his mother yelling from upstairs.
And he saw me.
I didn't mean to scare him.
But when he screamed, I saw myself reflected in his eyes. Pale, sunken, eyes black with sorrow. He started coming back, every day, sitting at the top of the stairs, asking questions I could answer. Are you sad? Did someone hurt you? Why are you down there?
I tried to reach for him, not to harm, just to feel something other than the ache of being forgotten. But every time I moved, the lights would flicker, the walls would groan, and his mother would drag him away in fear. Then one night, Eli came alone.
He brought a flashlight and a blanket. You look cold, he said.
That night, I felt warmth again.
The ghost of kindness.
He curled up on the top step and fell asleep.
And I sat below him in silence, watching, guarding, until the thing came.
Not all hauntings are born from the dead.
Some are born from the house itself, from the rot,
from the silence that grows like mold in the corners no one sees. The house twisted as Eli slept, wood cracked, whispers slithered. It wanted him. But I stood. For the first time in decades, I stood. Between Eli and the thing. Between innocence and hunger. And I fought. You don't fight with fists when you're a ghost. You fight with memory, with pain, with the refusal to let the house take another. The house recoiled. Angry. It shook. It screamed. But Eli never woke. And when morning came, he opened his eyes and smiled. I knew you were good, he whispered. They moved out soon after. His mother couldn't stand the dreams. But Eli waved at the hatch one last time before they left. Now I wait again, alone, but not as lost. I am still the man in the basement, but I am more than a shadow, more than fear. I remember who I was now, and I will protect whoever comes next. It had been years since Eli left. The house, though quiet, was never truly still. It groaned with hunger in the walls, and shadows stretched longer than they should. I spent those years waiting not for freedom, but for purpose, for someone who might need me the way Eli did. Then one day, I felt it. A pulse. It came through the floor, through the pipes, like a heartbeat I hadn't heard in decades. The house stirred, the cold thickened, and I knew someone had returned. It wasn't Eli. It was her. She came alone, older than Eli had been, but still a child, barely a teenager. Her name was Ruby. Her parents had bought the house cheap, unaware of its appetite. She was quiet, withdrawn, the kind of child who listened to the silence too closely. She found the hatch by accident. It was still hidden beneath the pantry rug, rusted and sealed with years of disuse. But something maybe me called her toward it. She opened it slowly, dust rising like breath from a dead body, and looked down into the darkness. And I looked back. She didn't scream. Instead, she whispered, "Is someone down there?" It was the first voice I had heard in years that didn't carry fear. She came back every night. She left crumbs, drawings, once even a locket with a photo of her dog. "I don't have many friends," she said. "But you don't look like you judge me." I didn't. I couldn't. But the house did. The deeper Ruby connected with me, the angrier the house became. Lights burst, doors slammed, Her parents argued constantly upstairs, their voices laced with venom that hadn't existed before.
The air grew heavy with dread.
I knew what was coming. The house wanted her. It wanted to twist her loneliness into something sharp,
to consume her sadness the way it consumed mine.
I tried to warn her.
I scratched messages on the walls.
Leave.
Don't trust the dark. She didn't listen. Not until the dreams began.
She saw me in them, only not me, but what the house wanted me to become.
A twisted, hollow-eyed version of myself, chained to the basement and drooping shadow. She woke screaming.
Her parents blamed the old plumbing,
the mold, the stress of moving.
But Ruby knew better. She came to me, crying. I think something's wrong with this place, she said.
Yes, I think it's using you. Yes.
That night, I made a choice.
I showed her everything. Not just my death, but the pain after. The way I had screamed for days until my voice cracked and bled into silence. The chains. The cellar.
The reason I never left.
I showed her the thing in the house, the hunger behind the wood, and she wept. But she didn't run. Instead, she lit a candle, a simple tea light.
She placed it at the bottom of the stairs and whispered, "You don't have to protect me alone." The house roared.
It cracked at the seams. Pictures fell from the walls. The foundation trembled.
But we Ghost and Girl stood our ground.
The light between us pulsed like a heartbeat, defying rot and darkness.
I felt it then, something I hadn't felt since before I died.
Defiance.
The house struck one last time.
A blast of shadow, a howling scream of every soul it had consumed.
But I stood in its way, not with chains, but with memory.
With every ounce of who I had been.
And Ruby, she stayed with me.
When the sun rose, the walls no longer whispered.
Ruby opened the hatch, looked down at me, and smiled. "I'll come back," she said.
"I promise." And she did. Every year. Even now, as an adult. She visits, lights a candle, sits quietly at the hatch and tells me about her life.
Her family, her children.
She calls me friend.
And in the quiet between her visits, I wait.
But no longer in sorrow.
Because now, I am not just the man in the basement.
I am a guardian.
Years passed.
Dust collected in the corners of my world again. The candle Ruby once lit still sat on the stone floor, melted into a hollow pool of wax. I didn't mind the quiet anymore,
because I had something to wait for.
She always came back, first as a teenager with stories of college stress and her first heartbreak,
then as a woman with a ring on her finger and strength in her voice. Her light never faded, if anything, it grew brighter.
But this time was different. This time, she didn't come alone. A boy, maybe 7 or 8, walked beside her.
Brown curls,
eyes wide with the kind of wonder I remembered once having. His name was Theo. He paused at the hatch and looked directly into the dark. "M.O.M., he whispered.
"There's someone down there."
My soul stilled.
He felt me.
Ruby smiled not with fear, but with something like peace.
"That's okay, Theo. He's a friend." For the first time in decades, I rose from the shadows not to warn, not to defend, but to meet. Theo stared at me with the quiet curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned what to fear. "Are you a ghost?" I nodded.
"Cool." Ruby laughed.
That same gentle laugh I hadn't heard in so long.
But the house wasn't laughing. It creaked louder that night. The nails in the beams stretched.
The walls groaned with the pressure I hadn't felt since the storm decades ago. Something had awakened.
The house remembered Theo's blood.
He wasn't just a visitor.
He was born of the one who wants to fight it. And that made him dangerous.
That night, I watched the walls breathe again. Dark seams split behind the wallpaper. I heard whispers, familiar voices that weren't mine. Old ones.
The house wasn't just haunted. It was alive, and it had plans.
I went to Ruby. "There's something deeper," I said.
"The house wants him." She didn't doubt me. She never had. She returned the next night with journals, old floor plans, a rusted key she found beneath a loose stone in the pantry.
We descended further than ever before. Below the basement was another chamber.
A root cellar, but wrong. Its stone walls were too smooth, its shape almost circular.
In the center, a pit,
covered in iron slats bolted into the earth. Theo stood above it and whispered, "It's calling me." I pulled him back. Ruby screamed. The pit opened. Black vapor, like breath from another world, hissed upward.
And from that darkness, I saw it, the thing I had only felt before. Eyes.
Dozens.
No shape, no face.
Just hunger. It had been waiting. For her line. For him.
That's why I was never allowed to leave. Not because I was cursed.
Not because I was bound.
But because I was bait.
And Ruby, her defiance had broken its sleep. But Theo, He was the door.
The house screamed.
Lights burst upstairs. The air became thick and electric. And then something shifted.
Theo stepped forward, not in fear, but with defiance of his own.
He reached into his coat and pulled out something small.
A candle, the same kind Ruby had once lit. He placed it at the pit's edge
And said, "You can't have me." The pit howled.
The house shook, but it couldn't cross the light.
Not this time. Ruby and Theo ran. I stayed behind, to guard, as I always have. Now, the house sleeps again, but lighter, calmer.
Ruby promised she would return once more, not to mourn, but to finish it.
And I will wait, not as a ghost bound by tragedy, but as the last wall between darkness and the living. I was the man in the basement.
Now I am its keeper. Ruby kept her promise.
She returned 2 weeks later, alone.
No child holding her hand, no laughter echoing up the stairs.
Only determination in her eyes and a journal clutched tight to her chest. It belonged to her grandfather.
A man she never met. A man who built this house. She sat in the basement beneath the single light bulb that always flickered, and read aloud to me.
Pages filled with ink-stained madness. Rituals. Symbols carved into the foundation long before concrete set. Mentions of a hollow below a space that predates the house. Predates even the town.
Her bloodline had always been the tether.
The pit wasn't sealed by chance, it was built around. They didn't build the house on the hollow.
They built it to feed it.
Each generation had offered something. A pet. A secret. A life. Until one refused. Ruby's grandmother. The journal stopped abruptly after she ran away. The hollow didn't take betrayal lightly.
That was the year the house became cursed.
That was the year I died.
Ruby looked at me, her voice shaking.
My family made you this way. I didn't answer.
I didn't need to. Guilt wasn't what I wanted.
It never had been. I wanted an end. She said she'd found a way. A passage beneath the hollow, hidden beneath the old well. Now sealed by roots and time.
A place where the true source slept.
Not just the pit. Something older. She wanted to go alone.
I followed anyway, through the rusted well.
Past crumbling stone and air thick with the taste of old rot.
She lit her candle.
It did not flicker. Not once. We reached a door. Not wood. Not iron. It pulsed like skin. There was no handle. Only a mark identical to the scar on Ruby's wrist. A birthmark she never understood. She touched it. The door breathed in and opened. Beyond it nothing.
A void.
Not blackness, but the absence of anything.
I felt myself waver, as if every part of me was being unwritten.
But Ruby stood firm. She stepped in.
I tried to call to her, tried to pull her back, but she turned and said, "I won't let it feed anymore." Then she was gone.
The void collapsed.
The well shuddered.
The ground moaned like a dying animal, and I was thrown back into the basement, alone, again.
But this time, not forever.
Because something changed. The air no longer hummed with hunger. The shadows no longer whispered names. The pit was silent.
I think she reached it. I think she faced it.
I think she won. And maybe now, at long last, I can feel something I've forgotten for over 80 years. Release.
I sit now where I always have,
watching the dust dance in beams of new light from the cracks in the boarded window. And I wait, not for another victim, but for a sunrise.
I thought it was over.
After Ruby vanished into the void, after the hollow below went quiet, I believed peace had finally come. For weeks, the house lay still. No creaks in the floorboards, no groans in the pipes.
Even the cold had lifted from the basement.
I stood in the silence, unsure what to feel.
Then it breathed.
Not loudly, just once. A soft exhale beneath the floor, wet, slow, like lungs filling after centuries asleep. And I knew the hollow had not died. It had changed.
Ruby had touched something ancient, something too large to kill, but small enough to wake. That night, the walls began to bleed, not with blood, but with memory, flickers of the past playing on the peeling paint. I saw the moment I died again, not from my own eyes, but from its the thing that waited under the house. I was never alone.
It was always watching. It chose me not by chance, but by design.
I was meant to die, meant to stay,
meant to become part of the house's memory. And now it remembered everything.
I tried to scream.
Not out of fear, but out of fury. I had been used.
Ruby had been used.
And the worst part, I still could not leave.
But something had changed. Ruby had left behind more than just silence. She left behind a thread.
A thin strand of her soul anchored to this place, woven into the scar in the basement wall.
I could feel her presence like a heartbeat. I followed it. Down. Deeper than I'd ever gone.
Beneath the stone. Beneath the roots. to a chamber lined with mirrors, each one cracked, showing twisted reflections. In one, I was a girl. In another, a monster.
In a third, I was her.
Ruby.
Her face stared back, lips moving with mine.
We're not finished.
She hadn't lied. She had merged.
She was part of the house, now part of me.
And she had learned how to fight back.
But the hollow was waking. We didn't have long. She told me the truth. The house wasn't feeding on souls. It was breeding them, making ghosts one at a time, turning grief into fuel, trauma into chains. But if two souls fused ghost and living, if we stood together in that final place below the mirrors, we could rewrite the foundation, not destroy the house, but unmake its memory, erase the pain, and maybe free us all. I reached out. The mirror didn't shatter. It shimmered, and I stepped through. Stepping through the cracked mirror was like falling through a dream, a waking nightmare. The air grew thick, heavy with centuries of sorrow and rage, as if the house itself was breathing through me. On the other side, the chamber stretched endlessly, walls lined with thousands of mirrors, each reflecting fractured fragments of memories, lives trapped, forgotten, stolen. Ruby was beside me, no longer just a whisper, but a presence burning bright like a fragile flame. Together, our souls intertwined, a strange harmony between the living and the dead. This is where it all began, she whispered.
I looked deeper into the mirrors.
I saw faces, men, women, children, all frozen in fear and despair, their stories etched into the glass like scars. This house is a prison, I said, voice echoing in the void. Ruby nodded.
And the hollow is its heart. It feeds on pain, but more than that, it traps souls, repeating their agony forever.
We moved forward, our reflections multiplying, until we reached the center, a great black mirror, void of light.
It pulsed like a heartbeat, dark and endless.
This is the memory it wants to bury, Ruby said. I reached out, hand trembling. The moment my fingers touched the surface, a storm of images crashed over me, painful memories of my own death, and the many who came before me, trapped and twisted by the house.
But then, Ruby's voice cut through.
We can change this, together. We poured every ounce of our will into the black mirror, filling it with memories of hope, of love, and of release. The mirror cracked.
Light exploded through the chamber, shattering every reflection into dust.
Suddenly, I felt weight lift from me, chains breaking, centuries of sorrow fading like mist. The house trembled, its hold weakening. We were free, or so I thought.
Because even as the light filled me, a whisper remained, a soft voice promising the hollow was not done.
It would return, but next time I would be ready.
Freedom was a fragile thing, like a candle flickering in a gale. The light that shattered the black mirror had banished much of the darkness, but it hadn't destroyed it.
The hollow was patient. It waited.
Days passed in the stillness of the basement, but I sensed it stirring beneath the floorboards, a cold breath brushing against my skin, whispering promises of despair. Ruby stood beside me, her eyes shining with determination. We can't stay here, she said softly. It's still hunting us. I nodded.
Then we fight. The basement transformed, once a cage, now a battleground. Shadows twisted and stretched, coalescing into monstrous shapes that lunged at us with silent fury.
But we stood our ground. I reached deep inside myself, drawing strength from the memories Ruby and I had shared, the laughter, the fleeting moments of peace, the hope we dared to keep alive.
The hollow roared, a sound like the grinding of stone and the wailing of lost souls. We pushed forward, breaking through its tendrils, ripping through its essence with every step. But the hollow was clever. It shook on the face of my fears, my isolation, my pain, my regret. Each step forward was a battle, not just of force, but of will. Remember who you are, Ruby whispered. You are not just a victim, I remembered. The child I once was, locked away in the attic, forgotten but unbroken. The man I became, bound not by fear, but by the courage to stand and face the darkness. With a final cry, we shattered the hollow's core, an endless abyss of blackness.
Light flooded the basement once more, warm and healing. The house groaned, its walls trembling as if mourning the loss of its power.
But we were free now. Together, Ruby and I ascended from the basement, no longer ghosts trapped in sorrow, but spirits reborn in light.
As we stepped into the dawn outside, the first rays of sun touched my face. For the first time in decades, I felt peace.
The hollow was gone. But I know, in the quiet corners of the world, darkness waits patiently for the next story to feed on.
And when it comes, I will be ready. The morning light felt foreign but comforting, like a promise whispered by the world beyond.
Ruby and I stood on the porch of the old house, watching the sun climb higher, burning away the last tendrils of night.
For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight of the basement was lifted from my soul. I thought this day would never come, I whispered.
Ruby smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the glow of dawn. You're stronger than you knew.
Yet even as the warmth spread,
A shadow lingered in the corners of my mind. The hollow was gone, but its mark remained. The house groaned quietly behind us, as if exhaling a long-held breath.
I could feel it, an echo of its dark hunger, a subtle pulse beneath the floorboards. Do you think it's truly over? I asked. Ruby shook her head, eyes narrowing with resolve.
Darkness never fully disappears. It waits. It watches. But we have a choice to live in light or to be consumed by fear. I nodded. Then we keep fighting, not just for ourselves, but for those who come after. She reached out and took my hand.
We're not alone anymore, she said.
Together, we can face whatever comes next.
As the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Hope. I was no longer just the man trapped in the basement, haunted and forgotten. I was a guardian now, a watcher over the thin line between worlds. Behind us, the house stood silent, its secrets held tight. But I knew the story was far from over.
The darkness would return someday, in some form, in some place. And when it did, I would be waiting, stronger, ready.
Because even in the deepest shadows, the light can still shine. Days turned into weeks. Ruby and I tried to rebuild, to reclaim the life the house had stolen. But peace is a fragile thing, especially when it's built on broken ground.
Sometimes, late at night, I'd feel it again, the familiar chill creeping up my spine. The faint echo of footsteps beneath the floorboards. Not the hollow, something else.
A restless presence.
A whisper on the wind.
One evening, Ruby found an old journal tucked beneath a loose floorboard in the basement, a journal that hadn't belonged to the hollow's victims, but to someone else entirely. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. It told of a man who had once lived in the house long before me. Someone who had tried to seal away a darkness far older than the hollow. His name was Elias. Ruby read aloud, voice trembling. He was a guardian too, but he failed. The weight of those words settled over us. If Elias had failed, was I doomed to do the same?
That night, as I lay in the attic, I felt the walls pulse not with malice, but with warning. The house was awakening, and so was the darkness beneath it.
I realized then that my fight wasn't just for freedom.
It was for survival, and the battle was far from over.
The house groaned in the dark, like a beast stirring from a long slumber. Every creak and whisper felt alive, as if the walls themselves breathed. I could no longer deny it. Something ancient was pulsing beneath the basement floor, a darkness older than any I had known. Ruby was frightened but determined.
She clutched Elias's journal close, searching for a way to stop the creeping evil. Together, we deciphered cryptic passages about rituals and wards meant to bind the malevolence underground.
But the more we learned, the clearer it became. Those protections were weakening, cracking under the weight of time and sorrow.
One night, the air thickened with an unnatural cold. Shadows twisted and stretched, flickering like flames in the flicker of candlelight.
I felt a presence watching, waiting.
The hollow wasn't alone anymore.
I tried to warn Ruby, but my voice was only a breath, a chill passing through the air.
She listened anyway, following the signs I left. Scratches on the wall. Objects moved slightly from their place. Together, in that grim silence, we prepared. The house was about to wake fully.
And if we weren't ready, the darkness would consume us all.